My name is Aurora Whitmore. I was 28 years old when I learned that sometimes losing a parent does not happen at a funeral. Sometimes it happens in a living room, while that parent is still breathing, still sitting across from you, still capable of speaking, but choosing silence instead. My mother died of breast cancer when I was 19. There are losses that break loudly, and there are losses that hollow you out quietly. Mom's death did both. By the end, the house smelled like hospital soap, lavender candles, and soup neither of us could finish. My father, Richard Whitmore, and I moved through those months like two people holding the same cracked bowl, terrified that if one of us loosened our grip, everything would spill. After she passed, it was just us. For almost 8 years. My dad was not only my father, he was my emergency contact, my Sunday dinner companion, my first call after good news, and the person who still remembered exactly how Mom laughed when she was trying not to. He had coached my soccer teams when I was little, taught me how to change my oil in the driveway, cried in the garage, the first Christmas without her. Then pretended he had only been looking for extension cords. We survived because we had each other. At least, that was what I believed. 14 months ago, Dad met Vanessa Marlowe at a charity golf tournament. He was 53. She was 41. She had glossy hair, perfect posture, and the kind of smile that looked warm until you noticed it never reached her eyes. Within 3 months, they were engaged. 6 months ago, they got married in a small ceremony with white roses, champagne, and Vanessa's hand resting on my father's arm, like she was claiming property. I was not thrilled by how fast it happened. But I told myself grief made people strange. Maybe Dad was lonely. Maybe he needed joy in a form I did not understand. Maybe loving him meant letting him have a life that did not revolve around the woman we had lost. So I tried. From the beginning, Vanessa was odd around me, not cruel enough that I could point to one moment and say, this is the problem. Just sharp enough to leave little cuts. Oh, you're still coming over for Sunday dinner, she asked once, tilting her head as if I were a neighbor who had overstayed. Don't you have friends your age? Another time, while Dad was in the kitchen, she touched the framed photo of my mother on the mantel and said, "Your father mentions you so much. Sometimes it feels like I'm competing with a ghost." I remember going very still. Then she smiled and added, "Not you, sweetheart. The past." The past became her favorite word. She used it whenever she wanted something removed. A photo album on the coffee table was living in the past. Mom's old mixing bowls were clutter from the past. My weekly dinners with Dad were old patterns. The Christmas ornaments Mom had collected were a little depressing. Don't you think? Then came the comment I still hear sometimes, when the house is too quiet. Don't you think it's time you started calling me Mom? Vanessa asked one afternoon, while pouring wine in my father's kitchen. We're family now. I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. She was not. Dad heard it. He was standing by the sink, drying his hands on a dish towel. He looked uncomfortable, but he said nothing. That became the rhythm of everything. Vanessa would say something that made my stomach tighten. Dad would look away. I would tell myself he was just trying to keep peace. Then I would go home, feeling dramatic for being hurt. Slowly, Dad changed. We used to text almost every day. A photo of something funny at the grocery store. A question about a recipe. A memory of Mom that hit one of us out of nowhere. But then his replies got shorter. Then slower. Then sometimes they did not come at all. Our Sunday dinners became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then Vanessa started saying they were busy. They were renovating. They were taking a weekend trip. They were creating new traditions. New traditions apparently required removing me from all the old ones. 2 months ago, My birthday arrived. Dad and I had always celebrated together. Even after Mom died. Especially after Mom died. He would make pancakes in the morning if I stayed over. Or we would meet for dinner, if I was working. He always bought me a card and wrote too much in it. The way fathers do when they are afraid spoken words will fail them. That year, I waited all day. At 9 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed. Happy birthday. Kiddo. V and I are at the spa resort for the weekend. We'll catch up soon. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Not because he forgot completely. Somehow, that might have hurt less. He remembered just enough to tell me I had been moved to the edge of his life. The next weekend, I drove to their house. My childhood home. The same porch where Mom used to wave when I left for school. The same blue front door Dad and I painted after she died because the old red one made him cry. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, rehearsing how to sound calm. Vanessa opened the door before I knocked twice. "Oh," she said. "Aurora. We weren't expecting you." Behind her, Dad appeared in the hallway. "Rory," he said. Using the nickname he had not used in weeks? That almost broke me. I asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room. Though it no longer felt like the living room. Vanessa had replaced Mom's soft curtains with cold gray panels. The mantel looked bare. The old family photos were gone, replaced by abstract prints in gold frames. Even the couch was new, stiff and pale, like something no one was allowed to actually sit on. Vanessa did most of the talking. "We're newlyweds." "Aurora," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "Your father and I need space to build our life together." I looked at Dad. He stared at the floor. "We're establishing new traditions now." Vanessa continued. "Healthy traditions? Forward-looking traditions." My mouth went dry. Then she said it. "We need to start fresh without the past." The room seemed to tilt. "Excuse me," I asked. Vanessa sighed gently, as if I were a child making things difficult. "Your constant presence is a reminder of Richard's previous life." I know that may be hard to hear, but it is true. Previous life. That was what she called my mother. That was what she called me. I turned to Dad, waiting for him to say something. Anything. My father, who once drove 3 hours at midnight because I had called crying from college. My father, who held my mother's hand until her last breath. My father, who promised me in a hospital hallway, "It's still us. Aurora. Always." He rubbed his palms against his knees and mumbled, "Vanessa thinks it would be best if we take some space for a while." Not I think. Not I want. Vanessa thinks, but he still said it. I asked him what a while meant. Vanessa answered before he could. "We're renovating your old room into a home gym. Could you come get your things by next weekend?" My old room. The room where Mom sat on the edge of my bed when I got my first heartbreak. The room where Dad left notes under my door during finals week. The room I had not lived in for years, but still believed existed as proof that I belonged somewhere. I asked about the family photo albums. Vanessa's expression flickered. "And Mom's jewelry?" I added. "Dad promised some of it would be mine someday." Vanessa gave a small, polished smile. "We've been decluttering. I donated a bunch of old books and papers. As for the jewelry, some of those pieces were very outdated. They didn't really fit our aesthetic. So we discussed having them redesigned into something more modern." For 1 second, I could not breathe. Mom's necklace. Her wedding ring. The little sapphire pendant Dad gave her on their 10th anniversary. The bracelet she wore every Christmas Eve. I looked at Dad again. He would not meet my eyes. That was when something inside me went quiet. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not plead with him to remember that I was his daughter. I stood up. I smiled. And I said, "I understand. You want a fresh start without me in the picture. Consider it done." Dad finally looked up. "Aurora, That's not what we... But Vanessa cut him off. I think Aurora understands perfectly. She said, this is for the best. The next day, I went back while they were out. My key still worked. That surprised me. I packed the last pieces of my childhood into 3 boxes. A sweatshirt from high school, a chipped mug Mom had bought me from a museum gift shop, a stack of birthday cards from Dad that I almost left behind because touching them hurt too much. Before I walked out, I placed the house key on the kitchen counter. Beside it, I left a note. For your fresh start, good luck with your new life. Then I closed the blue front door behind me. It has been 3 weeks since that day. Not one call. Not one apology. Not even a text from Dad pretending this was all a misunderstanding. 9 years of being his only family after Mom died. 9 years of holidays. Hospital scares. Oil changes. Grief anniversaries. And Sunday dinners. Erased because his new wife decided love was a competition, and I was the reminder she wanted removed. The worst part is not that Vanessa wanted me gone. The worst part is that my father let her open the door and watched me walk through it. 2 months passed after I left my key on the kitchen counter. 2 months of absolute silence. People always assume silence eventually becomes easier. It doesn't. It simply changes shape. At first it screams. Later it whispers. But it's always there. Reminding you that someone who once knew everything about your life has deliberately chosen to know nothing. Every morning I'd wake up and instinctively reach for my phone. Nothing. No. Good morning, kiddo. No photo of Dad's latest attempt at cooking. No terrible pun he'd inevitably send after reading it somewhere online. Just advertisements, work emails, and notifications that somehow felt louder because his name never appeared among them. Therapy became the only place where I admitted how badly I was falling apart. Doctor? Claire Morgan listened without interrupting. Then one afternoon she leaned forward and said something that stayed with me. You're grieving someone who is still alive. I frowned. That's possible. It's called ambiguous grief. She explained softly. Sometimes it's even harder than death, because your mind keeps waiting for the person to come back. She was right. When Mom died, there had been unbearable pain, but there had also been certainty. With Dad, every day carried the tiny hope that maybe today he would realize what he'd done. Maybe today he'd knock on my apartment door. Maybe today he'd tell me Vanessa had been wrong. Maybe today he'd choose me. Every evening proved me wrong. So I buried myself in work. I'm an architectural engineer. And, fortunately, my company had just landed 2 major commercial projects. 12-hour days became normal. I volunteered for site inspections. Late meetings. Impossible deadlines. Anything that left me too exhausted to think once I got home. When work finally wasn't enough, my best friend Olivia intervened. You need a hobby before you accidentally marry your laptop, she declared. The next weekend, she dragged me to an indoor rock climbing gym. I hated it. Then I hated it slightly less. Eventually, I started looking forward to it. There was something strangely comforting about standing beneath a wall that looked impossible to climb. Then discovering that every impossible route became manageable if you focused on the next handhold instead of the top. Dr. Morgan smiled when I told her that. Sounds familiar, she said. Maybe it was. Life had become exactly that. One difficult move at a time. About 3 months after the conversation at my father's house, I ran into my Uncle Greg at a grocery store. He spotted me near the produce section. For a second we both froze. He looked guilty before either of us had spoken. Hi. Aurora. Hi. Uncle Greg. He scratched the back of his neck. I've been meaning to call. It's okay. No. It isn't. Neither of us knew what came next. Finally he sighed. Your dad's not doing well. I waited. They're planning a vow renewal ceremony next month. I blinked. A vow renewal. They've only been married 6 months. I know. Who renews vows after 6 months? He gave a helpless shrug. Vanessa says it's symbolic. A celebration of their new chapter. Their new chapter. Another phrase that sounded suspiciously like replacing the old one. They've been spending a lot of money. Uncle Greg added carefully. More than I think your dad can really afford? I noticed the hesitation in his voice. Like there was more he wanted to say. But family loyalty stopped him. We hugged awkwardly before leaving. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A vow renewal. It felt less like celebrating love, and more like staging proof that their marriage was perfect. I wondered who they were trying to convince. Everyone else? Or themselves? Another 2 months passed. Then, completely out of nowhere, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing blueprints at work. Dad. For several seconds I simply stared at his name. The message was short. Aurora. Can we meet for coffee? Just the two of us. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just a request. I ignored it for 2 days. On the third day, curiosity won. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I walked inside, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner. His shoulders slumped. Dark circles hung beneath tired eyes that once sparkled whenever he laughed. Even his clothes looked loose. He stood when he saw me. Hi. Rore. I nodded. Hi. For several awkward minutes, he talked about traffic, weather, work, everything except why he'd asked me there. Finally, I set down my coffee. Dad? He looked up. What? You didn't ask me here to discuss the weather. His shoulders sagged. No. Silence stretched between us. Then he rubbed his forehead. I've made a mess. I said nothing. He took a long breath. Vanessa's spending got out of control. My expression stayed neutral. He continued talking, almost as though the words had been trapped inside him for months. She's maxed out 3 credit cards. Pause. She took out a personal loan. Another pause. I didn't even know about it. He swallowed hard. The bank called because of suspicious transactions. His voice had become almost embarrassed. She intercepted the statements before I saw them. I stirred my coffee. That sounds stressful. He nodded quickly. It is. Another silence. Then he looked directly at me. You've always been good with money. There it was. Not I've missed you. Not I'm sorry. Not how have you been? Financial advice. 5 months of silence. And suddenly, my usefulness had returned. You've always managed things better than I have. He continued carefully. I was hoping maybe you could help me figure this out. I folded my hands together. What does Vanessa think about you asking me? His eyes dropped immediately. She doesn't know I'm here. I see. Things have been tense. He looked around the cafe before lowering his voice. We're in danger of losing the house. My childhood home. For just a heartbeat. My heart lurched. Then I remembered standing in that same living room while Vanessa told me I was part of the past. What happened? He looked ashamed. I took out a second mortgage. Why? He hesitated. Vanessa thought remodeling would increase the home's value. What kind of remodeling? Kitchen. What else? Furniture. What else? He closed his eyes. The vow renewal. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the absurdity was overwhelming. The ceremony, you were both too busy planning to remember my birthday. His face reddened. I'm sorry. It wasn't my idea. I met his eyes. But you still did it. He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered. I know. For the first time since arriving, I actually believed he understood how badly he'd failed me. Unfortunately, understanding wasn't enough. What exactly are you asking me for? I asked quietly. He took another deep breath. I need help fixing this before everything falls apart. Translation. He wanted me to rescue them. Rescue the woman who had erased me. Rescue the man who had watched it happen. I leaned back in my chair. Dad. He looked hopeful. I think you should speak to a financial advisor. His smile disappeared. Or maybe a divorce attorney. His face fell completely. I thought, he said slowly. What? I thought maybe, for old times' sake. Old times. The words echoed between us. I repeated them softly. Old times. He nodded. I held his gaze. I thought you and Vanessa wanted a fresh start, without the past. He flinched. It was almost physical. Those exact words. The same ones he'd allowed Vanessa to use while destroying our relationship. I know, he whispered. They were your words. No. They were your choice. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he lowered his head. I stood, finished the last sip of my coffee, picked up my bag. I truly hope you find a solution. Aurora. I paused. I mean that. He nodded weakly. But I'm no longer responsible for solving problems you created. I walked toward the door. Just before leaving, I heard him quietly say my nickname, Aurora. For years, hearing that name made me feel safe. That afternoon, it simply sounded like someone remembering something they should never have thrown away. I thought that coffee meeting would be the end of it. I was wrong. About 3 weeks later, my phone exploded with missed calls. Dad. Dad again. Unknown number. Another unknown number. Then, finally, a text from Vanessa. This is an emergency. Please call us immediately. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour. Every instinct told me to ignore it. Every lesson from therapy told me I didn't owe anyone immediate access to me anymore. But curiosity won again. I called. Vanessa answered on the first ring. Aurora. Thank God. Her voice sounded nothing like the calm, polished woman who had once sat in my father's living room, explaining why I no longer belonged. She sounded terrified. We need your help. I stayed silent. She rushed on. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings. Another pause. We need $32,400 to catch up. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. A number. 500 million. Sube. She repeated. Your father says you've always been responsible with money. Responsible. Interesting choice of word. She continued before I could answer. This is your childhood home we're talking about. I almost smiled. The same home where you wanted to erase every reminder that I'd ever lived there. She hesitated. Then her tone changed. Soft. Persuasive. We've all said things we regret. I said nothing. Family stays together during difficult times. I finally spoke. I'm not family. Silence. You made that very clear. She tried again. Aurora. No. My father and I You needed a fresh start without the past. Another long silence. Then I heard movement. Dad had taken the phone. His voice sounded exhausted. Please. Just one word. Please. I know I failed you. I know I made terrible choices. But we'll lose everything. During the next 15 minutes, I learned just how disastrous those choices had become. Vanessa hadn't simply overspent. She had emptied Dad's retirement account. She had secretly sold Mom's car. She had borrowed money from relatives while promising repayment she never intended to make. Every time Dad tried to fix one problem, another appeared. It was like watching someone describe a house collapsing room by room. Finally, I interrupted. I need until tomorrow. Dad sounded relieved. Thank you. I didn't say I'd help. I know. But thank you for thinking about it. The next morning I called while Vanessa was at yoga. Apparently they couldn't pay their mortgage. But the yoga membership had survived. Some habits die hard. Dad answered immediately. I've made a decision. He waited. I'm not giving you money. The silence lasted several seconds. Then he quietly whispered, I understand. But... His voice lifted slightly. There is something I'm willing to do. I'm listening. I'll buy the house. Another silence. What? I'll purchase it at current market value. I explained everything carefully. The sale would pay off every outstanding mortgage balance. It would stop foreclosure immediately. There would even be enough left for them to rent a modest apartment and start over. But there were conditions. Every remaining belonging that had belonged to my mother stayed with the house. Any family heirloom Vanessa hadn't already sold would legally become mine. Everything would go through my attorney and my real estate agent. No shortcuts. No private agreements. No emotional bargaining. And they would have 30 days to move out. Dad didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Can I talk to Vanessa first? You have 48 hours. Exactly 47 hours later. My phone rang. Dad, we accept. His voice sounded defeated. Vanessa hates the idea. I'm sure she does. But we don't have another option. The next 2 weeks became a blur of contracts, inspections, legal paperwork, and meetings. Everything happened exactly the way I insisted. Professionally, legally, emotionally distant. The documents were signed. The ownership transferred. The house became mine. A few nights before they moved out completely, Dad called again. He was alone. I've been packing. His voice cracked. I found something. What? The birthday cards you used to make me. I closed my eyes. The ones with the stick figures. I kept every single one. He laughed weakly through tears. You always drew us fishing. I remember. I found them in the back of my desk. Another silence. I should have remembered those before I forgot you. That sentence hurt more than anything he'd said before. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know saying it doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I leaned against my apartment window. Outside. Rain tapped softly against the glass. When all of this is over, he asked carefully, do you think there's any chance we could rebuild something? I answered honestly, I don't know. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It breaks one decision at a time, and it heals just as slowly. I need time. I understand. For the first time in months, I believed he actually did. Exactly 6 months after the day Vanessa told me they needed a fresh start without the past. I unlocked the front door of my childhood home. My home. The silence inside felt completely different now. Peaceful. Not lonely. The first thing I did was hang Mom's photographs back in the living room. Then I found a box Dad had hidden in the attic. Inside were her handwritten recipes, chocolate cake, chicken soup, apple pie. She made every Thanksgiving. I framed several of them for the kitchen. Every room slowly began looking like home again. Not because everything was the same, because I had finally reclaimed the memories no one had the right to erase. 3 days after Dad and Vanessa moved into their apartment, everything collapsed. Vanessa disappeared. No goodbye. No explanation. She packed her bags while Dad was out buying groceries and never came back. Later, Uncle Greg called. Apparently, she'd been having an affair with a wealthy man from her yoga studio for months. She had drained Dad's savings while quietly planning her escape. When I heard the news, I waited to feel satisfaction. Revenge. Justice. Instead, I felt almost nothing. Karma had arrived without my help. Dad began texting regularly. Simple message. Hope you're doing okay. Saw the first roses blooming today. Your mom would have loved them. Take care. Rore. At first I ignored them. Eventually I replied with short, Polite réponse. Nothing more. Then yesterday, he asked whether he could stop by the house to collect a toolbox he'd accidentally left in the garage. I agreed. 1 hour. No longer. He arrived exactly on time. Standing on the front porch, my front porch, he looked older than his 53 years. Thinner, quieter. He hesitated, unsure whether to hug me. I wasn't ready, so we simply nodded. Inside the garage he kept pointing at little things. The dent on that workbench. You made it learning to use a hammer. He smiled faintly. We spent all afternoon building that birdhouse. I remember. Neither of us mentioned how strange it was that he now sounded like a visitor touring his own memories. Before leaving, he reached into his jacket and handed me a small wooden box. I almost forgot. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay Mom's wedding ring. Beside it rested the sapphire necklace Dad had given her for their 10th anniversary. I stared at them in disbelief. I thought Vanessa. I lied. He smiled sadly. When she started talking about redesigning your mother's jewelry. I hid these in my office safe. You hid them. I told her they disappeared years ago. His eyes filled with tears. I couldn't let her touch these. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he turned toward the door. "When you're ready," he said quietly. "Maybe someday we could have dinner. Just talk." I didn't promise, but I didn't refuse either. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen holding Mom's ring in my palm. I realized something. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Maybe one day I'll forgive my father. Maybe I'll never fully trust him again. Both things can be true. People eventually reveal exactly who they are. Dad revealed he could be weak. Vanessa revealed she could be selfish. And I discovered something about myself I never knew before. I was far stronger than the frightened daughter who walked out of that house 6 months earlier, carrying 3 cardboard boxes. Sometimes, revenge isn't shouting. Sometimes, it isn't winning. Sometimes, it's simply stepping aside and allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their own choices. They wanted a fresh start, without the past. In the end, I gave them exactly what they asked for. The difference was that I discovered I didn't need them nearly as much as I once believed. Life kept moving. I kept seeing Dr. Claire Morgan. I kept climbing higher walls with Olivia every weekend. A promotion at work was finally within reach. The future no longer frightened me. It belonged to me. And this house, once the place where I learned what abandonment felt like, had quietly become the place where I learned that healing doesn't begin when someone comes back. It begins the moment you stop waiting for them.